Luke chapter 8, verse 40 to 55. Starts with a guy named Jairus. Luke chapter 8, verse 40 through 55. But similar and different in how these Jairus and the other woman interact with Jesus. You're welcome. All right, so once you've read it, find a buddy and talk about it. A new buddy that you do not come in with. Similar and different between Jairus and the lady in the crowd. Hi. I didn't have a chance. It's very obvious. I couldn't get my phone to load. Oh, no, here. Take this very Don't be cut off from the excitement of reading it. Right. Zap.
I think this was an episode of General Hospital.
No.
How they rise from the dead. It's wonderful.
The story of the question was how
Wait, the question was how is Jairus' and
the woman in the crowd, are they similar and different in how they interact with Jesus?
How they interact?
I don't know.
Another girl who was dying, and the woman was leaving for 12 years.
All right, we ready to do a little jumping in? Jumping in together? All right. Just turn to your neighbor and tell them the movie you've seen the most times in your life.
Right here.
By choice and not because of your children.
Oh, yeah.
All right, we ready to go? All right. Let's jump into this story a little bit. So it says, Jesus returned and a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house because his only daughter, a girl of 12, was dying. All right. Well, this passage just jumps off into something intense. I think, Jairus is a man of some influences in his community, right? He's a leader of the synagogue. So the temple is in Jerusalem, but if you don't live in Jerusalem and you want to worship, then you go to a synagogue. That's like your local place of worship. And he's a leader of a synagogue, so he has like some influence, some power, he has respect in the culture. But something very, very terrible has happened, which his daughter is sick. And I know there's like a lot of parents here. And I think that there's like... I lived with my godchildren for many years as they were growing up. We lived in a duplex, me and my 3 godchildren and their parents and stuff. And we always retell this story of Stephanie, who was really young. They took her to SeaWorld, and she fell and hit her forehead on the corner of like a metal, like the bottom of a light thing. And you know how like head injuries just bleed like crazy? So she was like a toddler and she was running and she hit her head. And you know how like when parents see that stuff happen, they go into like some sort of next level, like adrenaline zone, where they're just like, like, is the child okay? And like they're focused, because it's like when your baby hits real harm, not like little fake cry harm, but when you're like, something's really going on. As a parent, like your focus elevates. Do you know what I'm saying? And then even this is more intense because like his daughter is on the cusp of dying. And I don't even want to like fully dig into this because I think we can fully derail parents by going into this like worst case scenario of like, but what would it be like if your 12-year-old child was like on the edge of death? But I remember walking through this. I was mentoring a woman. She was in college. I was working at Occidental College in LA, and her brother was in high school and he got cancer. He had brain cancer and it spread. And I remember walking with her family through that. And there's maybe nothing... I just could cry just thinking about it now. I mean, there's just nothing more ravaging than seeing like the face of a parent watching their child die. This is Jairus. Like he would do anything for his daughter. And so when he hears that there's a man who can heal, you can believe he's going to get there. And when he gets there, he's not coming in trying to play it cool. Sometimes when people fall at Jesus' feet, we act like, sure, that's not a big deal. But when's the last time you saw a grown man fall at another grown man's feet? It's weird. It's unusual. And in the Middle East 2,000 years ago, for a man of respect and stature to go up to another man and fall at his feet and beg for something is unusual. But he has no pride because he is desperate for his daughter. So this is an intense scene. Now, the other thing we have to be aware of is there are tons of people surrounding them. We've really been misled by that terrible picture of like white Jesus holding a sheep staring into space. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Profile Jesus, who definitely looks like he's been smoking weed. Like that's not what Jesus' life was like. Like he was perpetually and constantly surrounded by people who were like pressing up against him, right? So you see this when famous people head out, into amongst the crowds, whatever, I don't know, whoever is famous to you, Cardi B, trying to like shop amongst the people, you know what I mean? It'd be like Steph Curry just trying to eat in like Chipotle in Oakland, you know what I mean? Like there will be a crowd. And that's what they're talking about. It says, he returns and a crowd welcomed him. And as Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. So it's interesting. This guy comes up. He's totally desperate. He falls at Jesus' feet, pleading with him. And Jesus is like, yes, I will go with you. And what's interesting is the crowd isn't like, we should really give them some privacy. This seems like a personal thing. You got to remember, there's no internet. There's no television. There's no movie theaters. There's no radio. There's no cell phone. This is like the most entertaining thing that is happening in this city right now. Popular teacher, leader in the community. like desperate sickness, literally the whole crowd's like, oh, so this is where we're going. And the whole crowd goes with them. Okay, so it's just like loud and bustling. People pressed up against each other. So you have to imagine that, right? It's instead, we always imagine Jesus walking around in like a quiet contemplative state, with his baby sheep. That's not what it's like. Everyone's pressed up against each other. I don't know if you guys are like much of a concert going people. I grew up in Seattle in the 90s, which was like peak grunge. So it meant like peak mosh pit era. And I'm 5'4". So 5'4" in a mosh pit is basically armpit level. So like just a world of sweat. But you're like in there. I mean, just so many feet were crushed and so many toenails were broken open by so many people. But like, right, this crowd is going on. So that's the scene that's happening. Then we meet a second character here. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, and no one could heal her. And she came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. All right, so let's talk about her life for a little bit. 12 years is a long time to be sick. I want you to think about what you were doing 12 years ago. Like literally, where did you live 12 years ago in 2007? What was different about your life in 2007? Do you guys even remember where you lived? Mm-hmm. Did you have a different job? Did you maybe have fewer children in your life? Were you maybe single, married, what, right? That's how long this woman has been sick for. The entire lifetime of Jairus' daughter, this woman's been sick. I mean, have you ever had like a terrible cold and you're congested and you can't breathe? Right? Like you have to like eat with your mouth open a little bit, like with that heavy breathing eating where you're like, because you can't breathe through your nose and you're like, I will never take breathing through my nose for granted again, right? And that might be just for a day or two. 12 years. What do you think happens to a person who is sick for 12 years? Just emotionally. And I think we have to remember too, this is a woman in the Middle East, and this isn't just like bleeding from her, like a cut on her wrist. This is lady bleeding. Okay, there's like feminine bleeding for 12 years. It's 2019, and we don't like to talk about that stuff. 2,000 years ago in the Middle East, in 2019, ladies aren't like, hey, what are you doing? OBGYN. Yeah, girl. Nobody wants to go to see the lady doctor. 2,000 years ago in the Middle East, no woman wanted to go and see the doctor about this. Do you know what I'm saying? But she had to go see doctor after doctor. What do you think happened over time? Maybe year 1, what's it like? What, year 3? On your 4th doctor, your 4th dude doctor, we have to go talk about this. Think about, so just let's think about, like emotionally, give me some words that are going to describe her at this point. What's she feeling emotionally? Give me words. Hopeless, desperate, defeated, yes. What is her life like socially? Just to know, if you have like feminine bleeding at this time, you're ceremonially unclean. So you couldn't go into the synagogue or the temple to worship. So she's cut off from Jewish religious life for 12 years. A lot of people think that like she probably is divorced at that point because like the majority of men would not have like stayed with a woman in this situation for that long. So what do you think happens when you can't go to a place of worship and you begin to get cut off from your family? What do you think happens to your mental state? And what's happened to you spiritually? Yeah. Depressed. Isolated. Lonely. Right? The thing is, in the way like ceremonial being unclean works is when you're unclean, if you touch somebody else, they become unclean. So she's not supposed to come into a crowd of people where everyone's bumping up against each other. She's not supposed to do that. But she's desperate, right? So we talked about these categories, her emotional, social, religious, and just physically, the pain that she's been in for over a decade. Right, so you guys came up with this as well. So she goes, but she's desperate. And sometimes when you're desperate, you are going to break social norms, right? She needs to get healed. I watched this happen with my mom, actually. When my dad passed away in 2003, my dad he was 60 when I was born. Do a little math with that one. Most of the brothers are like, really? Into my 60s. Don't do that. But so when my dad passed away in 2003, because obviously we were grieving, my mom had like some physical issues, but she didn't go to the doctor because she was just very overwhelmed and stuff. And so she had this like intestinal fistula, basically like an infection that wormed its way through her intestines. And by the time she finally saw a doctor, it was like getting pretty bad. And then it turned out the doctor that she saw for like 2 or 3 years basically made it worse. Because when she went to the next doctor, the doctor was like, holy moly, like what did your last doctor do? All he's done is create massive amounts of scar tissue inside of you. And so then it took multiple years again to try to like heal and resolve this. So watching my mom go through that, the ongoing pain, the like incredible discouragement of finding out a doctor who had like put her through all this discomfort had actually made things worse. She was desperate. Like if I was gonna have to drive my mom to Canada or whatever, like we were gonna do it because she'd been sick. We were like 4, 5, 6 years into this process. So she makes her way through the crowd and she hears about Jesus. Now, she's different than Jairus because even though they're both desperate, the fact that Jairus is a man of some power, even when he's in a desperate situation, he has the confidence to walk straight up to Jesus. Does that make sense? He has a certain kind of position in his society that makes it so he can walk straight up to Jesus and say, help my daughter. But she doesn't have that kind of societal position. She can't walk straight up to a rabbi and be like, hey, I've got unclean lady bleeding, thought I'd bring that up in this crowd, feel like doing something, right? That just can't happen. But she's so desperate. She goes in the crowd, right? And you just have to admit, like, pushing through, right? And when you're like shorter, you can't quite see, and just pushing through, but she can tell like where the center of energy is, so she's trying to make her way over to where he is, and then make her way over where he is, the whole time knowing that like everybody would be pissed if they knew what was going on with her. And then like kind of through the crowd, she can see it's him. And she just, right, you kind of wedge your way through, get in there, and you just get close enough, and she's like, I don't even need to straight up ask this brother for a healing. I just need to touch him. And she just like reaches through and just touches his clothes. And she can feel it instantly, like wash over her. That she feels no pain for the first time in 12 years. That her body feels whole for the first time in 12 years. Can you just imagine what that feels like? I saw this, the internet can be like a garbage place, but it also can be beautiful. And I saw this video of a woman who had had cystic fibrosis her whole life and then had a double lung transplant. And the video was the first time of her breathing unhindered, like in her life. And of course, and she's literally just has her hands in the air and she's just like, and it's so deep just watching this woman breathe because she's never experienced this without pain before. Just imagine this woman head to toe. And then the scariest thing in the world happens. Jesus goes, hey, stop. Who touched me? Now, if you are her, that's terrifying. Because she doesn't know. She stole that healing. She didn't ask for it. She's not coming from Camp Hallmark. She's not coming from Precious Moments, Jesus. She straight up went to a rabbi, didn't ask permission, and like grabbed his clothes, and she got healed, but now he's stopping everything. Where's this gonna go? And so everything stops, right? And then the whole crowd stops. She's the only one who knows. And that's when the crazy sweating starts to happen. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like the anxiety sweating where it's in your armpits and it's like going down your back and down your clothes and like behind your knees. And she's like, please don't be talking about me. And then the disciples are like having their own moment where I just, Jesus says, someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me. Girlfriend knows it's about her, right? Ooh. They all denied it. Peter said, hey, buddy, the people are crowding around you and pressing against you. Right? I mean, I just love how he's trying to, like, handle Jesus. Like, hey, bro, like, we're trying to go to Jairus' house. Like, this is kind of urgent. I love that you feel like somebody touched you. It's probably, like, a lot of you. Right? Like, it's such a great moment. And Jesus is like, I felt power go out of me. I mean, he doesn't even bother with Peter. Like, he's like, I felt power go out of me. So, the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. Fell at his feet. And in the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him and how she'd been instantly healed. Now I want you to think about how vulnerable that is. The whole crowd is waiting to get to a very important person's house. Jesus has stopped everything. He hasn't said why. She comes forward. She is at his feet, probably shaking, probably sweating. And then she tells her truth. This is my sickness. This is what I've had. I have this hemorrhaging in my body. I've had it for 12 years. She tells her story. And then she tells about how she was healed. And then Jesus says to her, daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace. When we talk about her situation, her social situation is that she is cut off and isolated. What's the first thing Jesus says to her? Daughter. Now she's back in a family. Her emotional situation was so desperate, but instead of having to be afraid that she stole this healing, she gets to actually be with the person who gave it to her and receive affirmation, right? So spiritually, religiously, she's been unable to participate, and now she gets to hear, your faith healed you. You think I healed you, which, yes, the healing power came from Jesus, but you got that healing because of your faith. And so her faith gets affirmed in front of everybody, right? And then he says, go in peace. Talk about her emotional state, desperate, depressed, lonely. How long do you think it's been since she's known peace? And where was she? Literally, this woman started this story hidden in the crowd, in the margins. And where does she end? But in front of Jesus, on her knees in the same way, same place that Jairus was. Because society made it possible for Jairus to walk straight up to Jesus, but Jesus had to stop everything and interrupt everything and make sure she could get to him in the same way. And so she gets total emotional, social, religious, and physical healing. Amen? Amen. So beautiful. I love this story. And it's literally just another example of somebody going from the margins to the center. So I want us to interact with this a little bit, but I just want you to interact with it for a little bit. What stands out to you about how Jesus chooses to interact with this woman? All right, so talk about that with the person talk about it with me. What stands out to you about how Jesus interacts with this woman? All right, talk.
What stands out to you about story? It's like a whole scene. Oh my
Yeah, I was gonna end today. That's what I
But I never thought it would be on that.
What's at the end actually? What about how Jesus interacts with you? You were good. You had it.
But I think one thing that really what if he did? What if she just went? She got the healing and just left. What if Jesus didn't stop? This is probably
All right. Let me hear. What is some of the stuff you're talking about? What stands out to you? What do you like? What do you resonate with about how Jesus chooses to interact with this woman?
Could have been me.
You identify with her.
I mean, I have a home to live in. I'm feeling comfortable in that I have food and water and utilities paid. But there is a time that I could have been homeless, wishing I had an RV to live in, right? But it takes a person on the outside of the center to break through. And that's the gift that we were all given, is that we're all children of God.
Yeah. Good. So you connect with her story. What are the things that stand out to you guys? What do you connect with in terms of how Jesus interacts with this woman?
He didn't admonish her. And then he used that occurrence as a demonstration to the crowd that her faith was unconditional.
Right. Yeah. So he doesn't. He's interruptible, right? And I think that's right. He is actually in the middle of going somewhere because the girl dies while he is talking to this woman. So you have to think about what's going on. I'm not going to talk a lot about Jairus, but you got to think about Jairus's experience of this. Like, it's a costly interruption. And in the end, it comes around. But Jairus's daughter dies in the time it takes. Jesus' choice to be interruptible is costly. And I think that's an important principle. Caring about the margins isn't like always, like, I scheduled caring about the margins into like Thursday from 3 to 3:30. Like, sometimes caring about the margins is like whenever the margin string busts into your life. Yeah, and he doesn't shame her and he doesn't rebuke her, even though she broke rules. She broke religious rules. She broke social norms. But instead, he actually gives her something incredibly personal, and part of what she needs personally is affirmation in front of the crowd. She needs to be restored back into community, right? So there's the individual lens and the collective lens happening in her healing, like we talked about. What else do you guys like about how Jesus interacts with her?
I think what you just said, like, I thought about it from the perspective, what if Jesus didn't stop? What if she just went?
Okay.
What if she got that physical healing and went home? Like, how different would that have been, right?
That's right. That's right. See, Jesus cares so much about her. It's not enough that she's physically healed. He doesn't want her to leave insecure, unsure, afraid, not sure what. At that point, she has no idea what he thinks about her, right? Because she stole it. So he stops because he cares also about her emotional healing and her place in her whole community and that being healed, and her restoration into religious life, which has to be done publicly. So he loves her so much. It's not enough just for the physical healing to happen. He wants to see the whole restoration happen. So awesome. Jesus does that in a sentence. Love it. So good. So good. And Jairus' daughter has a father to advocate for her, and she doesn't have anyone to advocate for her. Who advocates for her? Jesus. Jairus' daughter has a powerful father who disrupts his life to get her help. This woman doesn't have anyone to advocate for her, but Jesus disrupts what he is doing to advocate for her and be her father, call her daughter, say her healing and wholeness matters to him enough to stop going to this urgent place over here. So beautiful. This is who Jesus is. This is what he's about. So as people who follow him, that's our model about how we walk in this world. What else stands out to you about how Jesus interacts with this woman? Yeah.
I find it very interesting that although she didn't ask him like verbally, she was still able to receive the healing, and it kind of just, it stands out to me because it shows that Jesus kind of, he hears all unheard prayers and he'll still heal you.
Yes. And just that Jesus is that powerful. Like Jesus is just like radiating power. Like radiating healing power. Like I think sometimes we need to get back in touch with that side of Jesus. Like can we do a brief aside about how Jesus is powerful enough to heal? Can we talk about that for a moment, saints? All right. A few years after I got married, time has become a blur in my 40s. But my husband we were both on staff with InterVarsity at that time, and one of his students, Elisa, she was going through a pretty hard time. She was kind of first in her family to go to college, and her dad had gotten stomach cancer, and it had just ravaged their family and been super traumatic. And about the middle of the year, she started getting, she was probably a sophomore or junior in college at that time. She got really, started getting sick, started not feeling well. She didn't have a big family support system. We finally got her to a doctor, and she had stomach cancer. And it was exactly like that. And it was pretty far along, and it was exactly like that. Finding out that someone that young has cancer because it ran in her family. So she went back, and she had a very significant, situation in her stomach. They were testing to see if it had spread, and I can't remember. She was living with us for part of that time, and we had to go away to a conference, and we're getting ready to go, and then actually, I told you about. The woman I mentored and her brother having cancer. So her brother got brain cancer, and he ended up dying after his freshman year of college. And his parents heard about Elisa, and they said, bring her to our house, we want to pray for her. But you have to imagine, is an incredibly vulnerable and risky thing to do when your own child has died of cancer. But these were that school of Asian immigrant Christians who hardcore pray. Do you know what I'm talking about? 5 a.m. pray people. Do you know what I'm talking about? Prayer mountain people, scare you pray people. So they're like that kind of prayer folk. And so, we thought it was so generous of them to offer. So my husband took her and Sarah, the girl whose brother had passed away, and they all went to her parents' house, and they prayed for her. And in the course of praying for her, she had this really weird picture of being by a river and going by the river and throwing up. And we were like, okay, that's a weird. And I prayed for her. She came home. And then we had to go out of town to this conference right after that. And she calls us and she's like, I had the weirdest dream after I got prayed for. All night long I kept dreaming that I would go by the river and I would throw up and these black rocks would fall out by the river. And she goes, I'm right before this surgery is supposed to happen. She's like, I think maybe God did something. And we're like, you're in an awkward place at that moment, right? Because you want to be like, yes, I have faith in God. Also, medicine, right? We just felt really torn as and she didn't have a lot of parental involvement, but she went to the doctor and she insisted that they redo like all the scans on her body before the surgery, and they were like, we literally had just done this to prepare for the surgery, and she's like, I'm not having the surgery until you do it. And they scanned her and her cancer was gone. And she had been healed. And I share that story with you because the Jesus that healed this woman is still the Jesus that can heal people.
Amen.
Amen? Now, I can explain to you why. Sarah's brother wasn't healed when his parents prayed for him fervently, and that Elisa was healed. But I want to testify that Jesus can heal, and he can heal today.
Amen.
It's not just something for the olden days. Amen? Amen. And I wasn't really planning on sharing that story, so I feel like the Holy Spirit must just have something for Embrace Church around like Jesus still heals today. So, receive the word. All right. Jesus heals. I just have no sense of where I am in my talk anymore. So let's just pretend we're reflecting while I figure it out. I'm not trying to be smooth, saints. All right, I'm just trying to talk about Jesus. All right. So Jesus still heals. Amen.
Amen.
I'm just talking to the Holy Spirit. What do you want to do? We're all in this together, Lord. What are you trying to say? Okay. Great. Take it in. I just got distracted by that story. What's God doing? Like, why was I supposed to tell that story? Like, I don't even know. What's happening right now? We need just like, does the Holy Spirit want to move and people are supposed to get the gift of healing? I don't know. I come from a Holy Spirit background.
Come on.
Is that what we're doing? You let me know. All right. I'm going to continue going, but we're having a collaborative moment. So if at some point you just feel like the Holy Spirit's like, All right. So Jesus can still heal. The other thing that we see going on is this listening to her story, right? He doesn't just be like, I know it was you, lady, and I gave you the healing, and like, right? But there's something about hearing her story that is transformational and important, that she has to come forward and speak and participate. And I think that part of going from the margins to this, part of being in the margins is that your story is silenced and erased. Part of being in the margins is that your story is silenced and erased. And so when you come to the center, part of that process is your story gets to be told and people actually listen. I think I experienced this in a very personal way. So I think like when we think about going from the margins to the center, I think that there's like a personal way we experience this. Like in any social situation, you might be like, I am the dork on the margins of this social situation, right? Do you know what I'm saying? Like everyone's walked into a space and been like, I feel like an outsider. I feel socially on the margins, right? You've been in a situation where that happens. You've also been like, maybe in a work situation where you're like, I am like the new person in this organization and nobody needs to treat me nicely, right? I'm like literally on the power margins of like my job, right? Anybody? No, nobody started out as like the new person in their job? Okay. I think there's like systemically the way society marginalizes people, right? And there's bigger systems, and we need to be able to think about margins to the center on all those layers. Does that make sense? So I'm going to share a story of just my own personal experience of it's being on the margins, and then how sharing my story was helpful. I can't go all the way into it, but like I grew up, my mom took me to church, but when I got involved with InterVarsity in college, and I started like what she called following Jesus too much, she did not like it. And in true like Korean mom style, she wasn't like, let's sit and talk about our feelings, like what's happening for you, and like this is what I want. But no, right? My mom's like old school Korean immigrant. She was like, I will cut you off from this family if you don't stop doing this. And I was like, it was like a choice between like, I was falling in love with Jesus. I was seeing these stories. I felt like I was supposed to live in this very radical way. I mean, just even like little things like share my car with people, right? Like I felt like very Fight Club, like the things you own end up owning you. So you have to figure out how to not like overly attach to your possessions. And I was like, the only way I'm not going to be like overly attached to my possessions is to share them generously. So I was like, I'm going to share my car because it's hard for me, right? And so and she's like, I bought you that car, so you can't share it. And then I was like, I respect that, but if I can't share it, I have to give it back to you, because I can't have stuff that I can't share because of what it just does to my heart and what I think it means to follow Jesus, where it says they share all their possessions in common. And she was like, you are very ungrateful. Then when I graduated from college, which she had paid for me to go to, I decided to go into ministry and fundraise, which my mom calls begging for money. So my mom for sure did not come to the United States for her child to go to college and then beg people for money so she could work in some weird thing where she doesn't leave college but just keeps hanging out with college students. So my mom basically, like, she financially cut me off from our family, and then she was also like, and you can't fundraise from anyone we know because it's super embarrassing, it's very shameful, and I'm very ashamed of you. And it hurt like hell, and it was terrible. And then it did. It was tense all the way through college, and it was brutal, but I felt like this is, like, I really understood in that season when it says, like, you have to hate your mother and father. I was like, I didn't hate my mom, but I could tell that my decision to follow Jesus felt like I hated her to her. And it was brutal. It was a brutal season. It went on for almost 10 years. And in that time, I was on staff with 2 people who their parents had worked for InterVarsity. So when they came on staff with InterVarsity, their parents were like, oh, baby's going into, like, the family business, and, like, here's our donor networks, and, like, we're so proud of you, and just like, oh, we're just so proud, and we understand your job, and we just think it's the best. And so as I was grieving, like, you know, I'm an only child, right? I'm like my mom's only child, and my mom was my parents' marriage was very difficult and isolating, and so she did that thing where, like, I became her primary person. So to be out from under my mom's blessing is, like, one of the most painful places you can be as an Asian child. And so I was in a lot of pain, and I just felt like I had these coworkers who I was living in the same house with who just didn't understand. And I felt like I was paying all these costs to do this stuff, and that they were, like, you know, skipping through Disneyland. And I had my housemate, Elizabeth, and I remember she's like one of those people who are, like, good friends, but also you sort of hate each other, like, because you're like, I mean, we were just good friends, but we're, like, only good friends because Jesus, right? And so we were just, like, we loved doing ministry together, but also, like, I found her kind of annoying, and we just had this fight one day, and then I just started crying, and I was just like, you don't understand what I am going through with my mom to be on staff, because you're often, like, Whitelandia with your, like, little happy white parents, and, like, I'm over here, like, literally, like, just cut off from my family. And I'm like, you don't understand, like, you just don't understand. And I just thought she was gonna, like, leave because I'm being pretty mean to her. And I remember this moment where she just sits on my bed and she starts crying. And she goes, I don't understand, but I love you. And I want to understand. Tell me what is happening for you. And it was the first time, like, I'd been in so much pain, and I would talk about what was going on, but it was the first time someone had ever really just stopped and said, tell me the story of what's happening. And her tenderness cut through the pain, and I sat down and I just started talking. And I was just able to, like, share. And in the way that I was on the margins in my ministry situation, she brought me to the center with her compassionate listening and her willingness to hear my story. She gave to me what Jesus gave to this woman, which she interrupted what was going on. She didn't get distracted by all the pain that was making it messy. And she really wanted to hear. And that really did something to our friendship, and it did something to my own healing. And years later, you know, my mom, God did a work in my mom, and she came around and she gave me her blessing to be on staff. And but that was years later. So that's Elizabeth getting married.
Oh.
And that's me on the right. Listening to people's stories is a really important part of this living a life of being someone who cares about those on the margins. And I think, as someone who follows Jesus, to know that in the ways you have experienced being on the margins, Jesus is interruptible and wants to interact with you in that way. I think sometimes we can't extend that kindness to other people because we haven't let Jesus interact with us in the ways that we have been put on the margins. And so for me to experience that from my friend and experience Jesus through that helped me extend that more to other people. And so I think a question I'll have us think on is like, are there ways you've experienced being on the margins, but you haven't? Like, girlfriend takes a risk to go to Jesus. We're like, I wish Jesus would like magically show up and come to me and like bring all the magical healing. But there is this thing where she comes to him and takes a risk to reach for it. And then Jesus overwhelmingly responds to that. But maybe where have you experienced being on the margins? You know, and I don't know, like, I don't want to be like Asian family stereotypes or whatever, because it's like not every parent is like my mom. But for many who come, if you come from certain Asian cultures, it's not like a like let's all sit around the table and like unpack our feelings and you know from the feelings suitcase and like process them. That's not the family we grew up in. And so we don't know how to bring that to Jesus, right? Like I used to joke that, I talked about this with my husband, because he would talk about his parents and how they just wanted him to be so independent and like have friends and stuff. And I was like, my Korean mom doesn't care if I have friends or if I'm independent. Korean people want obedient children, all right? They don't want like independent children. And he was like, really? My parents just want me to follow my passions and stuff. And I was like, no. So, but if you have that cultural backdrop, then we feel like also God is interested just in you being obedient and less about knowing you interpersonally. But an interruptible Jesus is something that we need to receive, not just bring into the world, but we need to experience as well. Does that make sense? Yes. So I just want to pause on that for 1 second. And I'm going to wrap up because time has escaped me completely.
Amen.
I wanted to share one other story, but can you stand up and just turn around and smile nicely at somebody and be awake for a second?
Reading happy. That's smiling.
What's up? I got the knees.
All right.
Chest bump.
I'm going to just tell one last story. Stay standing if you need to. Pastor Sam, sorry I'm going a little long.
Keep going.
All right, so just the principles we see here is listening to story. You can sit or stand, whatever you need to do to stay alert. In order to hear people's stories, you need to be in proximity with each other. I'm not going to dig into that. The thing I want to say is when people share their story with you, you have to believe them. Now, this might seem like, sure, but actually, this is a far more radical principle than we realize. And where I learned this principle basically began on a really deep level the fall of 2014 when Michael Brown Jr. was murdered. So I was working for a campus ministry. I've been working for Black campus ministries for a long time, working with Black students and Black staff, and that was a lot of my staff team. But when that happened, actually it probably started a year before that with the non-indictment of George Zimmerman after he murdered Trayvon Martin. So Trayvon Martin, right, is coming home from 7-Eleven with like a Snapple and some Skittles, and some rando dude is like, that kid's dangerous. I should definitely chase him down and murder him. And I was leading a summer program at that time, and I was of about 80 college students who were living in like under-resourced communities for the summer, and we put them on a budget of like $20 a week, and so I brought this up for us to discuss because we're talking all about God's heart for those on the margins, and we're talking about God's heart for this city. And I was like, hey, you know, this is very upsetting. They didn't indict George Zimmerman. And we were processing that, and then I remember this young Black woman in the group, she goes, I'll have to be honest with you, I haven't even been thinking about it. And I was like, oh, okay. She goes, I haven't been thinking about it. She goes, because I have so many friends in my hometown, in my immediate circle, that I actually know who have been like killed by the police or experienced violence by the police or experienced this kind of thing, that I don't need to care about stories in the newspaper. It's just a part of my everyday life. Now, she's just shared a part of her story. That is absolutely not a part of my experience in this world. I was like, as a half Korean, half white woman, like police are just super nice to me all the time. Do you know what I'm saying? But I have to make a choice to believe what she is telling me. Now think about this. Jesus is a healthy, well-respected Jewish man. There's nothing in his experience that understands what it's like to be this woman, to be sick like this, to have female bleeding, to be humiliated like this. He does not relate to her experience, but when she tells her story, he believes her and he responds with compassion and empathy and love. And I watched, starting with Trayvon Martin, through George Zimmerman, through Eric Garner, we just got a decision that that policeman is not going to be held accountable. And every single black person I knew said, watching these videos is agonizing for me, and it's personal, because I experience violence at the hands of police all the time, and I am terrified, and people I know have experienced this kind of trauma. And the fact, and it's traumatizing me that as I share my story, people all around me, and especially Christian family, are not believing me. It is radical that when people tell their story, and it's very different from yours, to believe them. That they are telling you the truth about their lived experience, even if it's utterly different. I have never had a negative interaction with the police, but I know that every person in my congregation has a totally different experience, and it doesn't have to happen to me for me to know that it's real. And so I want to put out there that it's about listening to people's stories. Like when the thing happened with Michael Brown Jr., the code phrase for "I don't believe your story" is "let's wait for all the facts to come out." Mm-hmm. That's code for, but see, that embedded in that is a kind of hierarchy that says, I'm the one that gets to decide what things are racist. I'm the one who gets to decide if I think your story is authoritative. Right? There's these embedded assumptions of why you get to do, and it sounds like logic, but it's actually not. And so when the Ferguson report came out a couple years later, all the data was in there that was like, yes, the police have been like profiling black folks and like over policing those communities and actually like doing on so many layers, traumatizing that community. But that didn't change people because it really wasn't about wait till all the facts come out. It was just, that's not my story. And I've been taught, and this is going to, deep in our culture is a belief that black people and their lives are fundamentally less valuable. Now, we don't walk around saying that, but in our founding documents, we made black people fractional. And even after they were taken out of slavery, there's been, legally, we have always made black folks less than fully human. Jim Crow, was that full humanity? And after Jim Crow came the system of mass incarceration. If you're not familiar with how the system plays out, you should read the new Jim Crow. It's a seminal work and important if you're going to live on this earth, in this country, in this decade. But basically, what it was a deliberate choice to begin over-policing black communities, and then taking people who were doing things like maybe selling like 2 or 3 ounces of weed, and then doing mandatory minimums that would basically lock them up for life for that. So there are people who are in jail for 30 years for selling like a couple ounces of weed on the corner. And you have to remember that in the 80s and 90s, people were telling stories about super predators. Who was telling those stories? But now when white folks sell weed, it's entrepreneurial and it's innovative, right? It could get delivered to your door. But when black folks were selling weed, it was ultra dangerous and probably everybody would die. Like, you have to think, there are still people locked up 30 years. I want you to think about it. Because we have been taught to believe that black lives are disposable. I realize that this takes time to dig into, but I have found that for me, in wanting to build deep relationships with people of other ethnicities, the thing that has gotten me very far has been that when people tell me something is true for them, that I have believed them. And that has changed everything. I got to have a very profound experience with it. I'm not going to tell this story, but that's young, Erna, with big old hair. in 2014, I got to put together this worship team, and we were leading worship in St. Louis, Missouri in 2015, which is a year and a half into Black Lives Matter, right in the city. Black Lives Matter really, really coming onto the national scene. And we journeyed through that together. We were this fabulously multi-ethnic team, and we were exploring, we were doing all styles of worship. We were doing gospel, and talking about Asian American worship, and white worship, and Latino worship, and singing in Spanish, and doing all the things. And in the midst of that, we were listening to each other's stories. And there was a deep moment where we did a listening circle with Asian American worship leaders, and one of the things that came up is we talked about how in Asian American communities, like being asked questions and being drawn out is really meaningful to us. It just was like a side thing that happened. And then we all, like an hour or two later, had to go to rehearsal, and we're in rehearsal. And then in the middle of rehearsal, Shed, right here, who is our keyboard player, we're in the middle of rehearsal, and he pauses and he goes, hold on a second. He goes, I'm really thinking about what the Asian American folks on this team said, that it means a lot to them to be asked questions and being drawn out. And I think we haven't asked enough questions and drawn out their story enough. And I think we should do that right now. And he literally just called rehearsal to a stop and was like, we need to sit and listen to our Asian American fan more. And I think for every Asian American person that was on that team, it was maybe one of the most meaningful moments they had. To have Shed say, I heard what you told me about your community, and I'm stepping into that. Similarly, as all these, during the course of that year, as all these terrible videos were coming forward, we were listening to our Black brothers and sisters. In our community, we listened to each other in an even way. But when we got onto stage, we amplified the stories of our Black brothers and sisters, because systemically what they were experiencing that year, particularly what was being highlighted that year, was a great evil. And to pretend that everything was we should do everything 25%, wouldn't be true to life. If that makes sense. So we amplified the story of our Black brothers and sisters, and we did more with gospel. We did more with talking about it. And this is I work for a white evangelical organization, so the fact that we wore Black Lives Matter shirts, was a pretty big deal. And basically from that's why I don't work there anymore, because they basically blackballed me after that and ousted me and most of my friends, and it was pretty brutal, and it was very bad for my mental health, but that's a whole nother story. But it was well worth it, because in front of 15,000 people, we amplified the story and brought to the center and said, in this Christian space, we're listening to our Black brothers and sisters, and we believe them, because evangelicals had been a big group of people who were we don't know. And out of this conversation that we're having, I called folks to repent of not listening to the stories of our Black brothers and sisters. And that made room for a certain type of friendship between us. So later, when Craven had her 40th birthday, she came up to Portland with me, literally got off the airplane, and she was like, we tripled the Black population in Portland. Pretty awesome. So, yes, out of the 4 of us, 3 of us don't work for that organization anymore, because it was because when you try to center the margins, there will be pushback. But to this day, it's still one of the things I'm most proud of having done in my life.
Amen. Amen.
Because to be able to say, as a Korean and white person, I'm literally on the stage. I am the center, right? I'm on a stage in front of 15,000 people. And who I'm going to bring to the center is Shedrick and Craven, and we're going to tell their story. And I'm going to say, I believe them. And that's justice, and that's worship, and that's community, and that's family, and that's healing. Because it's all those things at the same time, all the time. Amen? Amen. And so that's what I want to share with you guys tonight out of this story, and just invite you to continue to wrestle with what that invitation means for you guys. So I have a few small group questions. That's my staff team at my church. And it's a Women of Color conference I led. And that is not all of our questions. Surprise! So are there ways you've experienced being on the margins? Have you reached out to Jesus for healing? Where do you see people being marginalized in your family, community, state, country? I don't know. I guess apparently I didn't finish writing the small group questions. If I did that, I apologize. I'll type a few more up, but essentially talk about what I said and see what it means for your lives. Amen?
Amen.